Hello. So today we are going to be talking about thought wellness. But before we begin, I want to introduce myself. My name is Hank Skalstead. I am one of the counselors or doctoral interns over at CAPS, which is an acronym for Counseling and Psychological Services. Today I'm going to be doing an educational workshop. So it's not to be confused with counseling, nor should it replace counseling. We're going to be looking at certain tools, coping strategies, and skills to better manage your current concerns. This is a series. This is one workshop in a series of workshops. The other one being stress wellness, which is basically stress management, and then mood wellness, which is basically mood management. So today we're really going to work on being able to better manage your thoughts, your negative thoughts, and your worrying, okay? Now, accompanying this video workshop is also a packet. So I want to be able to share to you what it looks like. So this is what the packet looks like. So I am going to be referencing this packet during the presentation, okay? So please, if you can have this out, it would actually be better if you can print it because we are going to be doing some exercises within the packet. If not, then you can also have a pen and a piece of paper available. Okay? All right. So let's go back here. Okay. So we're going to be talking a lot about thoughts today and worry. So I'm going to read you the quote at the bottom of the left-hand corner. Worrying is like a rocking chair. It gives you something to do, but never gets you anywhere. So this is really trying to get that kind of the feeling of that stuckness that worry can bring. So if you're in that current state, hopefully by the end of this kind of workshop, you'll be able to feel at least a bit more unstuck, or at least have some of the tools to kind of get you out of there. So what are the objectives for today? Well, first, we're going to learn how your thoughts impact your feelings and behaviors. Then we're going to learn about specific unhelpful thinking patterns or also cognitive distortion. I'll kind of get into the definition a little bit later. Then we're going to learn how to change or reframe your negative thoughts. And then we're going to practice increasing positive self-talk or affirmations. Now, before we begin, I really want us to take some time now, just about a minute or two, just to kind of reflect and think about your own experiences, thoughts, behaviors, and feelings. So we really want to improve our relationship to worry and negative thinking. So we need to first begin to identify our own unique thoughts. Right? So just take a minute or so to reflect and think about maybe what today would look like, maybe this past week, and see if there's anything that comes to mind. Okay, so if you need another minute or two, you can feel free to pause the video and just come back to this portion of the presentation. So generally people have around 2 to 3 areas in which they're worrying about. Often, and this is common with some of the students that I kind of work with, they come in with fear or worry about passing an exam or maybe getting an A on an exam if they have certain expectations. They also have fear of transitioning into some of the college level work, or also fear of maybe not making friends. Other concerns is maybe financial difficulties, maybe paying bills. Another one is sometimes there's some health concerns or maybe body image concerns. And then finally, also being able to balance all the different responsibilities, work responsibilities, family responsibilities, academic responsibilities, right? So trying to find that nice balance. So I really want you to think about what is one of your primary concerns, which we will get back to later, okay? So just take a moment. Okay, good. Okay, so what is worry? So worry are unpleasant thoughts that are difficult to manage and are often about a feared outcome in the future, okay? So one example example that I've kind of talked about with another student is the fear of being all alone in the transition going from high school to college, right? It's important to recognize that that thought and worry is actually very normal. The reason why it's normal is that often it's because of things that we care about. So in this case, it's about relationships and feeling safe. So worry only becomes a problem if it starts to become an obstacle in sort of preventing us from living our life as is, right? So if you really start to engage with the thought that I'm all alone, it starts to paralyze you and prevents you from really kind of getting out there, then that's when worry really becomes a problem. Now, worry can also lead to various changes in your body. So again, if you kind of come back to that example, it's really difficult to be alone or feel that way. So if we really engage in that thought and we really believe that we're all alone, then that could stimulate something called the fight or flight response or the parasympathetic nervous system. It's more of a survival kind of mode that sort of gives signals to the body that we're in danger. So some symptoms might be like heart racing, maybe sweating, feeling like a tingling sensation in our hands. That something bad is about to happen, right? So these are all signs that, okay, we might be worrying about something, okay? You can also think at this point, we've been talking about that rocking chair. This is also a place where a lot of students kind of get stuck, or a lot of people will get stuck. It's because they're trying to solve the problem, but they're in this fight or flight mode, so they're not quite utilizing that different part of their brain to help them move out of that current situation. So this is just highlighting the mind-body connection, that there is a very strong correlation between our thoughts, what we're worrying about, and then how it impacts our body. So the body, again, is a place where we can kind of gain information about how we're thinking. Okay. So this is just a quick diagram that hopefully kind of a picture that kind of gives you a little bit of an image of what it looks like, maybe that worry process, right? There's so many things kind of going on in our mind, and it feels pretty chaotic. Okay, so what are automatic thoughts? So I've been talking a lot about thoughts, but what are automatic thoughts? Okay, so they're the initial thoughts, beliefs, and judgments that can impact emotions and behaviors. This is a quick diagram that's showing that. Let me move myself here so you can see. Thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are all interlinked, and they all affect each other. But we're really going to focus on the top left-hand bubble there of thought. So sometimes it's helpful to kind of go through an example. So let's say you have the thought that I'm unattractive. That could lead to feelings of sadness. And then let's say that feelings of sadness might prevent you from going out to a party, right? Because you feel like you're really down, you're not in a good place, right? So in this case, having a thought impacts the feeling of depression, then feelings or sadness, and then that impacts the kind of movement away from others. So you can think about thought as like an input-output system. So you input a thought, and then you're going to output some type of feeling and behavior that's connected to that. So it's just really important to know that these are all interlinked. So there's 3 general questions to ask. We want to think about, number 1, I think we should also start here on the bottom right-hand corner, actually, is how do you feel? Right? The feeling is a good indication. If you're feeling sad, anxious, stressed, happy, whatever it is, it's important to then think about, what am I thinking, right? Because the feeling is always going to be connected to a thought. Then the other question is thinking about, what am I doing, or what are you doing? So that's the behavior. So those are the 3 questions. What am I thinking? How am I feeling? And what am I doing? Okay. Okay, so let's go over an example. So let's say there's an upcoming exam, okay? So now that's the situation. Now we're going to focus on the thought. Let's say you have the thought that I must be stupid. I'm definitely going to fail this exam. So how would you feel? Well, you might feel anxious because you know there's this upcoming exam, and if you know you're going to fail it, then it's kind of a bad outcome. Now you might also feel sad and frustrated. It just kind of depends. Each person kind of has a different approach to a certain thought. So one person could feel depressed and sad, and the other person could feel more anxious. That's unique to the person, but you can also have all three. So as a result of those feelings, let's look at the behavior. Let's see what you're doing. Well, in this case, you're choosing not to study and hang out with friends, and you start hanging out with friends instead. So you're you're kind of moving away from those feelings, and you're not completing the work, or you're not studying for it. So that means that you're starting to procrastinate not doing the work, and that also sort of reinforces that same thought that you might fail again, right? And then that kind of leads back into some sadness or anxious feelings. And so the cycle continues. Okay, hold on a second. So let's say instead we have a different thought here. So it's the same situation, but let's say in this case, you have the thought that says, well, I feel that it could be challenging, but in the end, I think I can do this, right? I know if I put the right amount of work, I'll be able to do well. So then that might lead you to feel a bit more relaxed, a little bit more calm, more engaged, more motivated. Then that means that your behavior might be more likely to begin to study because it feels like you're going to do well, or at least you're going to pass the exam. You're not kind of stressing out as much, right? So again, what do you think, how do you think you'll perform with those types of thoughts? Right? You might perform better than if you had the thought that I'm going to fail the exam. Right? So this is kind of highlighting the importance of thoughts in your overall performance and behavior. Right? So in this case, you have the same situation, different thoughts, and then different feelings, different responses, and then different outcomes. So here we're really trying to develop a greater awareness of the underlying thoughts so we can then identify and replace thoughts to improve our well-being. So we're replacing that top part into more of a positive and hopefully more realistic process, more realistic thought, I'm sorry. So we've been talking a lot about worry. So now we're gonna go into a video that's a short video that kind of discusses some of the common patterns that researchers have found in terms of identifying some of these type of unhealthy thinking patterns, okay? But before that, I have to make sure that I turn on the sound. So let me just make sure that that's kind of working. Okay, it looks like it's working. Okay.
Today, we're going to talk about ATs, also known as automatic thoughts. They're those destructive and unreasonably negative thoughts that you have that make things go from bad to worse. Avoiding ATs feels as impossible as avoiding red lights when you're running late. You're going to hit one or two, or every single light from your house to work on that morning that your report's due at 9 a.m. and your boss is already on the edge and you might just get fired and then get evicted and... See? Automatic thoughts can pop up and escalate as easy as that. Regardless of reality, ATs are the things that help you build a couple of red lights up to an Armageddon-scale catastrophe in a matter of seconds. Today on Wellcast, we're going to show you how to manage those harmful automatic thoughts with healthier, rational ones. And we're going to use our triple R exercise. You are going to record, rationalize, and replace your ATs. But first, how serious are ATs? A study at UCLA shows that people who got caught in cycles of automatic negative thinking became clinically depressed, self-critical, and less successful in both their work and personal lives. According to Dr. Glenn Scaraldi, these negative, disordered ATs fall into 13 categories, all of which take a toll on your mental health. Here are some of the categories. Assuming or mind reading. Like when you are sure someone is mad at you, even though you haven't spoken to them just because they walked in and didn't say hi. Shoulds, musts, and oughts. Those are the insane demands that we make upon ourselves in our quest to be impossibly perfect. The fairy tale fantasy, where we demand an ideal for our life and decide that anything less than that ideal just isn't fair. Overgeneralizing, Nobody likes me. I always ruin everything. And finally, catastrophizing. When you take a little problem and turn it into a big, terrible, life-changing event. How do we stop ATs? Good question. And the shorter answer is we don't. But by being conscious of the fact that we're having them and working to replace them with rational thoughts, we can keep them from endangering our mental health. And that is today's exercise. All right, everybody, take out your Wellcast journal. It's time to learn the 3 R's. Step 1, record an upsetting event. When something upsetting happens during the day, describe it in your Wellcast journal and record it in excruciating, painful detail. For example, today I found out that I got a C on my midterm. Step 2, rationalize. Now it's time to think about the automatic thoughts associated with the event. Pause and print this chart. In column 1, write down each AT you had about the upsetting event. For example, I am never going to graduate. In the second column, try and label each distortion. Some ATs might be rational, but most won't be. They'll most often fall into one of the categories we discussed. I am never going to graduate falls into the category of catastrophizing. Step 3, replace. In the third column, respond to each distorted AT. Talk back. Get those negative thoughts off your chest. And if it's hard to do that, try to imagine what you'd say to a friend who is struggling with their own AT and say it to yourself. When you're responding to those ATs, ask yourself some questions like, what's the evidence for this response? Is this a believable outcome for my situation? Will the world end if I get a C on this midterm? Of course not. So as time goes on and you're more used to responding to your ATs instead of letting them take over your life, you should be able to replace those ugly negative thoughts with more rational ones. Let's recap. To keep your automatic thoughts from ruining your mood and running rampant, you're going to record upsetting events, rationalize them by addressing each irrational thought, and replacing the irrational automatic thought with a rational one.
Okay, so that really that video kind of highlights these kind of negative ATs, so or we call them NATs, impact on your overall well-being. Now they did mention that very often it's irrational, right? So that's where there's a cognitive distortion. It's a distorting of how things are. So we really want to begin to identify them and then gradually begin to replace them with more like rational, okay? More rational thoughts. So they talk a little bit about the triple R's. So that's the record, rationalize, and then replace. We're going to go into a version of that later because it is important to start to become aware of what's going on under the hood, so to speak, by writing it down and then gradually learning the skill of replacing the thoughts. Okay, so all right, so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about unhelpful thinking styles. I know they said 13, but we're really going to look at 11 of the most common. Okay, so on the left-hand side are all the different types of unhelpful thinking patterns that we're going to go through. But before we do that, I just want you to look at this slide. So I think this image is important for 2 reasons. Number one, if you kind of notice the languaging which this person is using. So I can't, oh no, it's impossible, other kind of words. That's also a signal of unhelpful thinking styles is never, always, should, must, right? So it's important to kind of be aware of how you're languaging things because those are an indication if you use these types of words that you're probably having some cognitive distortions or these unhelpful thinking styles. The other thing to point out is look at the images, right? Images such as like the money flying away. If you have any image or any memory that kind of comes to mind that continually comes up for you, you can then translate that image into a thought. So the one with the dollar might be something like, I'm never going to be able to find a stable paying job, right? So now we can work with that thought, okay? All right. Okay, so the first one is magnification minimization. So blowing things out of proportion which is the negative component of the situation, and shrinking them. So let's say you have a performance. It could be a musical performance, could be any performance. And there's like a mistake that you made. But yet, let's say you still got, a good, maybe a standing ovation, or there's a lot of clapping. But you tend to focus on the one mistake that you made, and you only look at that, right? That's really this magnification component. Now, if you're looking into the future and you're magnifying some sort of possibility, some negative possibility, now that's catastrophizing, really kind of going to the negative outcome, focusing on it and blowing it up, and then seeing that that's what's going to happen. That's catastrophizing. Minimization is shrinking the positive. So let's say you passed an exam because you studied really hard for it, but you say that, well, it was luck, right? So you're kind of minimizing the hard work and effort that you put in, and then just kind of only focusing on like what you're unable to do, okay? So overgeneralization. So you conclude that what happened to you once will occur over and over again. So in this case, let's say you were working for a promotion and you didn't get the promotion, and then you feel or think that you'll never be able to kind of be promoted at your job again. So you're overgeneralizing, and you're thinking that this past experience of let's say rejection is going to always happen, right? So personalization, you conclude that every negative event that happens is your fault. So one example that a student came to me is that when he was staying in his dorm, his roommate kind of came and was angry. It seemed like apparently about something, but what my student said is that, I think he's angry at me, right? There's something that I did, right? So then he went to kind of search for all the things that he did. It wasn't necessarily the case, right? In this example, it looks like the roommate was really struggling because he got into an argument with his girlfriend. So that's an example of personalization. You make it about yourself. Okay, mind reading. Hold on one second. Okay, mind reading. It's you assume that you know what the other person is thinking, right? So let's say you go into a professor's office hours and you talk with them for a while, but you have the thought that, the professor must think that I'm stupid. Right? Now that's not necessarily the case, but you're kind of looking into his mind, his or her mind, and thinking that that's what they must be thinking about me. Again, you're kind of going into the other person's thought process and thinking it's true. Fortune telling. So you predict that something bad is about to happen and you consider it a fact. So let's say in today's difficulties in the economy, you might say that, okay, because it's a currently bad economy, it's always going to be that way, right? Now, there might be some truth to the current difficulties, but you don't know for sure. So that's called fortune telling. Labeling and mislabeling. So you create a negative self-image of yourself based on the errors that you did. So one thing is that, let's say you failed in one of your exams, and you call yourself a loser. Or let's say you failed a relationship, or a relationship didn't work out. That's a label that you place on yourself, but that's not actually who you are. Let's say that you were also late for an appointment one time, and you label yourself as irresponsible. Okay, these are just some examples of just kind of like overgeneralizing about, based on one incident, and then labeling yourself. You'll kind of notice too that there's some overlap with these unhelpful thinking styles, right? So in that case, overgeneralization, labeling also very often go hand in hand. Emotional reasoning. So you accept your emotions as evidence for truth. So let's say, for example, you're about to board a plane and you have a feeling that it's going to crash, right? There's kind of this visceral feeling. Now, just because you have the feeling doesn't mean it's going to happen, right? So again, there's kind of these thinking errors that can happen. So disqualifying the positive. Okay, so here, let's say you get a glowing review from, let's say, from other people. at work. Even though, despite the fact that you put in a lot of work and effort, you're saying that, well, it's because other people helped me. That's the only reason why, I got this good review, right? So again, you're taking something that's a positive and you're turning it into a negative about yourself. So in this case, that you might start to think that, okay, maybe I'm dependent on other people, right? So that's now taking it and turning it into a negative. Should statements. So these are often the rules that you have for yourself. And they're your kind of expectations, and often creates a lot of pressure on yourself. So I should never make mistakes. I should always get A's. I should always be sacrificing for others. So you'll notice that these are the different types of words in which you'll start to notice this particular type of cognitive distortion. I should, I must, he should, or she must, right? Those are the common feelings that come up with frustration, shame, and guilt. If you are having some of those feelings, then there's a great likelihood or chance that you're utilizing this cognitive distortion. So all or nothing thinking, this is, or they call it term black and white thinking. So you interpret events as either extremely good or bad. There really is no in between. Okay, so that's something like, I'm never going to do enough, right? So again, the key word there is never. That's kind of shows the extremes in your thinking process. The other thing is, okay, either I'm going to get an A on the exam, or I'm going to be a complete bust, or I'm going to fail the exam, right? So that's a very common one with other students. So mental filter, you see the negative in any situation, dwell on it, and perceive the entire situation. So let's say you have, you're with a group of friends, and there might be like an awkward moment there that maybe there's some silence, you didn't know what to say. But in the end, after the interaction, it feels like you had a good time in general. It seems like the friends want to get together again. But you start to, again, kind of focus on this awkward moment, and you can only see that, right? You can't see everything else, right? So, because you had that awkward moment, and then it feels like, okay, I don't want to hang out again, and it was just a bad experience, right? You're really looking through a lens that's very negative in this case, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to start to begin to challenge these negative thoughts. Now, before we do that, and I'm going to go through an example with you. I want you to take out the packet, so the thought wellness packet, and I want you to go to the third page, okay, where it says challenge negative thoughts. So here I want you to bring back or recall that thought that I talked about earlier to reflect on. See if there's a particular type of worrying thought that you have, and I want you to place that in the first box there. Again, if you don't have this packet, you can just write it down, okay? And I would, again, if you don't have this packet, write down all these questions, because I want us to kind of work through your own unique negative automatic thought, okay? The other thing is that we just went through a lot of these kind of cognitive distortions. If you can go onto the second page as well, look at the cognitive distortions and see and identify which ones you kind of resonate with, or that feels more like you, okay? And then write an example of maybe one or two of them that you've noticed, okay? So again, I'm just gonna pause it here for about a minute or two. Okay, so just about a minute or so. And while you do that, I'm going to be going back to the PowerPoint. Okay, so I know that was a short time. It's about a minute or two. I just want you to start thinking and putting this stuff down on paper so we can kind of work through it. If you need some extra time, please feel free to just pause the video, okay? Okay, so challenging negative thoughts. These are the questions that I think are really important to begin to challenge that worried thought. So we're going to go over an example. So again, because the exam situation comes up very often, let's say you have the thought that I will fail the exam and that my parents are going to disown me, okay? So you have the situation, the upcoming exam, and you have those thoughts, okay? So the first thing is we're going to ask, what is the evidence that the thought is true? Again, that I'm going to fail the exam and that my parents are going to disown me. Okay, so let's look at that. Let's say that the evidence for you is that you failed an exam maybe 5 or 6 years ago, right? So maybe because it's happened in the past, that might happen again now. Okay. Some evidence that your parents are going to disown you. So let's kind of take a look at that. Let's say the parents grounded you before because you failed an exam. So that might get a hint as the possibility that your parents might disown you. Now let's look of some evidence that it's not true. Well, did your parents ever kind of kick you out of the house and kind of disown you before because you failed an exam? No, that didn't happen. In terms of like the failing of the exam, you haven't failed any exam probably like since high school. There really hasn't been any evidence that suggests, as long as you put in the work and you're studying, that you'll be able to pass the exam, right? So now let's go to the second one. Is there a more positive, realistic way of looking at the situation? Yes, there might be here, right? So let's kind of think about this. Yeah, so the positive or more realistic way of looking at it is that I likely won't fail the exam. I haven't failed many in the past as long as I put in the amount of hours of work in which I've done. And that, let's say the parents are rooting for me and I'll likely be proud of me once I do well. Even if I don't do well, it should be fine because they have been understanding before in other situations, right? So again, that's another approach, another way of looking at it. Now, what is the worst case scenario? Well, the worst case scenario might be what I just described, right? I'm going to fail and that they're going to disown me. So what is the probability that will happen? Now, for everybody, it is different because everybody has different parents. Everyone has a different history. So you really want to gauge as realistically as possible what is the probability that will happen. Very often, it's a lot less than what we think. So let's put this maybe at a 1% chance, right? So if you're able to see that it is a low probability, now I want you to think about what are some other outcomes, right? So some other outcomes might be, well, if I study for a few hours a day, I can maybe get an A on the exam. Or maybe if I study last minute and with the help of a grading curve, I might get maybe a B plus, right? Or maybe I get a C, but with extra credit it ends up being a B. Or I fail the exam. I talk to the professor and find other ways to kind of make up the grade, right? So it's really about being creative and seeing what are the possibilities are out there. Now, the next one is, how is worrying about the thought helping or hurting? Very often, like, worrying is not very helpful, right? Again, kind of going back to that rocking chair, a lot of time it's a waste or expenditure of a lot of energy. So nope, it really doesn't help in this situation. It just contributes to feeling more anxiety. Now, the last one is, what would I say to a friend who had this thought? Well, something, I think this is a really important one to really think and reflect on. Maybe who are your best friends, growing up or right now, or, who's a loved one? Maybe it's a family member, right? What would they say in this situation? So in this case, they might say something like, come on, you've done well in the past. You'll likely do well now. I know that you're smart. Besides, if you don't do so well, it's not going to end your academic career, right? This professor has also been known to give you some extra credit. And hopefully, besides whatever happens, I still love and care for you, right? So it doesn't matter in some ways to them, if you fail an exam, because they still like you and love you for who you are, right? So it's, again, helpful to kind of remind yourself of that. Okay, the last kind of strategy to think about is the what if. So the negative, for every negative what if, rehearse a positive what if. So this one's pretty simple. The negative what if is, what if I fail? They disown me. A positive what if is, what if I get an A? And my parents actually feel proud of me, right? Okay, so now I want to draw your attention back to the thought wellness packet and we're moving to the following page. So it's going to be the one that says the thought log, right? So we're just going to fill this out, or I'm going to talk you through the thought log of what we just did. So the event and the trigger is going to be the upcoming exam, and the thought is that I'll fail the exam. My parents will disown me. The emotions might be something like sadness or anxiety. The behavior might be procrastination, right? And now the most important part that we've been working on is a reframe or alternate response, right? So that's where you'll, once you answer those questions that we went through, you're going to write that down there, right? So one thing that I think that I wrote is there's a less than 1% chance that I will fail. You have done well in the past and you'll likely do well again. And besides, if you do fail, you'll likely find ways to improve your grade. Your parents still love you and it won't be the end of the world, right? So you kind of get that feeling of we're changing that initial thought to something different that is more realistic and more positive. Now, the thought log is a really good way to begin to identify your own patterns, your own thought processes, and then practicing the skill. The most important skill is on the right-hand side, the reframing and providing an alternate response. As you start to develop that, you'll start to notice different changes in how you're feeling and then how you're behaving. Okay, so it's an important tool. This is also very similar to those triple R, right? Record, rationalize, and replace. It's almost the same thing, except it's a little bit more broken down. Now, we didn't talk about the unhealthy thinking styles. If you find it helpful, you can also label what type of unhelpful thinking style it is, right? So in this case, it would be catastrophizing. So kind of going into the future and thinking about the worst case scenario, and then also overgeneralizing, right? Those are the two different unhelpful thinking styles of that thought. Okay, so now we're going to go back to the PowerPoint. Okay, we're going to go to the next slide. So it's putting it into perspective. Okay, so these are other questions too that help you, again, reframe that initial negative thought, right? So let's come up with another scenario. Let's say that you got into a big argument with your significant other to the point of where you might almost break up. Right, so that's the situation. So now we're kind of, you might have the thought of something like, okay, you might have something like my life is over, right? Sometimes we become so infused and so attached to the other person that when there's even any hint that it might be over, and we feel like it's all over, like our life is over, right? So I think these are some questions to ask. Is this situation as bad as I'm making it out to be? If that is the case, what is the worst thing that could happen, and how likely is it? So let's say the worst thing is that you break up for good, right? And how likely it is, again, for each person is different. But again, if you're in this kind of negative automatic thought realm, then you're likely making it worse than it actually is. So I want you to really begin to reflect and think, what is the realistic likelihood that that's going to happen, that you're going to break up and it's all over for good, right? Maybe you can put a percentage on it, maybe 10%, maybe 25%, right? Now these next two are also similar to the previous slide of really thinking about in a positive way, what is the best thing that could happen? Well, maybe you've had an argument, you've been able to understand what's going on, you can talk to them about it, and then that makes you closer, you become more intimate, right? So that's also a possibility. Then it's thinking about what is the most likely to happen. Well, in all honesty, very often, arguments happen, and you likely will make up after maybe a couple of days or so, right? Again, we're trying to move away from the extremes and really find more of the realistic possibility or outcome. Is there anything good about the situation? Now this is, again, trying to frame it in another way. So you can look at it, I've had some students really, and I'm a big believer in the love languages. So once we have conflict, a lot of times it's because there's different love languages. One person really has need for words of affirmation. The other person is more about quality time. So sometimes, something that a good thing that can happen is that you learn each other's love language, and you'll be able to make some adjustments for the next time, right? And again, if we're putting this in perspective, will this matter in 5 years' time? And really think about all the arguments that you might have had within 5 years, and how many do you really remember, right? So this helps to kind of gain some distance from the current situation. Because the likelihood is that it's an argument, and then we'll kind of be able to move on after that. Okay, so now I want to go through some examples, again, back to the Thought Wellness Workshop packet, right? So we're going to look at that. And now we're going to go to the sheet titled Challenge Anxiety. Okay. So this is really where we're practicing being able to come up with that reframe, another way of talking to ourselves, and a different type of thought, right? So we're going to go through a couple examples together. So let's say I have the anxiety-producing thought that I know I won't be able to finish my work on time. Okay. So what would be a way in which you can begin to challenge that and kind of reframe it? Well, an example might be I can work for 30 minutes and see how far I get. I might get most of my work finished and can complete the rest after a short break, right? Okay, so I'm gonna go over the next two with you as well. I can't go to class like this. Everyone will notice me. So I'm going to be able to talk to you about the rational thought that I kind of came up with. But if you can, why don't you pause the video here and see if you can kind of complete this and write down what you think would be your own rational thought. Okay, good. So what I wrote here is that everyone won't likely notice me. They're likely focused on themselves. And even if they did, it's only for a few seconds. And they will likely go back to what they're doing, right? So again, you're being able to challenge it, reframe it in another way. So again, the last example is I can't face or ask the professor for help. They're going to be upset with me. A rational thought that can kind of challenge that is professors are here to help me learn. I'm sure that they're used to being asked for help, and they could even appreciate the questions as they're likely to show interest in the material, right? Okay, so if you look at below, I would like you to put in now your anxiety-producing thoughts on the left-hand side, and then finding your own rational thought to begin to challenge this anxiety-producing thought. So that's where you kind of go back to these questions, right? Ask these questions about that anxious thought and see if you can write down one of those thoughts here, okay? Okay, so one of the last things that we're going to discuss about is this idea of being kind to yourself, right? I love this kind of quote, always practice reckless optimism and kindness. One of the ways in which we do this is kind of I guess kind of like a technique called reflection of the day. So I'm going to pull that up for you right now. So this is a Word document, but this you'll actually find in the Stress Wellness packet. That looks very similar to the Thought Wellness packet in terms of the front cover, but you're going to go towards the back and you'll find this. It's called Reflection of the Day. So these are prompts that get you to start thinking about what happened during the day, but in more of a positive manner, right? So depending on what day you're watching this, I'd like you to kind of go to this, to the prompt, and just fill that out and write that off to the side. So today is Wednesday for me, so it would be really focusing on today I accomplished X. I was proud of myself when this happened. What made me smile today was whatever, right? And so I want you to write that down. Now, often it's helpful to do this at nighttime, maybe before you go to bed, because once you kind of put this in, you can really allow it to kind of seep in into your sleep, right? And so you can really start to gain a different, a more positive way in which you can begin to do this. Right? Okay, the other things is also positive affirmations. These are little statements that are positive in nature that look into a thought that you really want to anchor into your mindset, right? So given what's going on in today's world, I think the first one is really important. I focus on what I can control instead of what I can't control. It's helpful to kind of repeat these positive affirmations throughout the day. And you really want to focus on one of them, one or two maximum, right? Again, it's helpful to kind of do it when you wake up in the morning and then when you go to bed, right? Those are the best times. So some other example is my mind is calm, my mind is positive, my mind is powerful. I release worry, I release self-doubt, I release fear, I release anxiety. Again, you just want to choose one of these, right? My thoughts are peaceful and calm. I'll treat myself with kindness, patience, and respect. Today, I will find joy in where I am. Okay. And the last one is self-compassion, right? So as you're learning these skills and these tools, just know that be patient with yourself. Very often it can be hard to see a lot of these negative automatic thoughts that come up. So just know that it takes some time. Again, I would kind of go back to that idea or technique of really looking at yourself through the lens of your best friend or a family member. Okay. Whoops, I noticed I didn't share my video, so I can share my video there. Okay. So here, hopefully you really got to learn about the impact of your thoughts and your feelings and behaviors. You're able to identify some unhelpful thinking patterns or cognitive distortions that you've been going through, and you're also learn how to change or reframe your negative thoughts, right? So those are all those questions that we were going through. These are all really important tools and skills that if practiced really can develop your ability to kind of handle these negative automatic thoughts and these worry, right? So it's helpful to think about this as like a muscle. So the more you practice and the more you kind of work on this, the better you'll get. And hopefully you'll really begin to develop improved kind of well-being, a greater sense of joy and happiness as we begin to kind of replace this negative thoughts, okay? It's really my pleasure, and thank you so much for taking the time to be a part of this workshop. Thank you.